Our third and final presenter for the day is Brynn Kimber from the University of Washington, so she didn't have far to travel. Brynn's talk is about how the ice flow up in the Arctic has actually decreased due to warming, and it's opening up new areas for killer whales to go into places that they've really never been before, right, Brynn?
Mm-hmm. I'll get into it, yeah. Thanks, Larry. So my talk is on tracking killer whale movement in the Alaskan Arctic relative to a loss of sea ice. I'm Brynn Kimber. I work through the University of Washington for the National the Marine Mammal Lab at NOAA. So before I get into the data, I just wanted to orient everyone to the data set. So this is a map of Alaska. Also, the geography of Alaska is important to keep in mind, so try to keep this map in mind, although I'll have refreshers for it. So as you can see on this map, it's dotted with green dots. Those represent each of our lab's passive acoustic moorings. So these are essentially anchors out in the open that record all year round in duty cycles. They have various instruments attached to them. For us of note is, of course, the recorders, which record marine mammals in the area, as well as ship noise and abiotic noise like ice. And they also have various other instruments attached to them, like temperature probes, salinity probes, etc. So for this study, I wanted to kind of highlight a few different areas of these moorings. The southernmost one is in the Bering Strait of Alaska. Then we go a little bit further north up to around Utqiagvik and Icy Cape. And then all the way up in the corner is our Chukchi borderland mooring. So I noticed when I was going through our data, listening for these killer whales, that each of these different areas had different trends associated with sea ice over the years. And so I'm just going to run through each of these different areas and kind of walk you through the different trends that I saw, all relating for presence, absence, killer whale calls, and sea ice. So this is our Point Hope mooring. So this is in that Bering Strait area. And what I noticed when I was looking at the data, I'll show you this graphic. So we have the black bars represent killer whale detections in 10-minute bins. So that's actually how much the killer whales are calling. We can see the month on the x-axis. So that corresponds, of course, to the time of year. The grayed out area is where we don't have any data. And then the blue line represents ice cover. So what's important to look at through these different years of mooring is when the killer whales are starting to be detected and when the ice is going away. So kind of just visually looking at this, you can see that the ice, where it was coming in around June in 2012, 2013, when we get down to 2019, it's actually coming in much earlier. So we see about a month earlier where the ice is receding and we get our first open water period. And of course, then that's when the killer whales are coming in. So whereas we can see in 2013, the killer whales were coming in around our sort of June period, as we go further in time, we see that they're coming in much earlier, quite in line with when the ice is actually coming in.
Just face forward, just read from the laptop.
Oh.
Stop trying to look at that. Just look at, it's the mic, it's extremely sensitive.
Okay, sorry. Sorry.
Your presentation is on the PC, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
So when we are looking at this site, what we see is that the killer whales are coming earlier in relationship to the ice. So essentially when that Bering Strait corridor is opening up, the killer whales are also coming in. So if we look a little bit further north, we can also see a similar, a different trend with the ice. So here we see some killer whale detections where we did not see them in the earlier years. I've circled or put a square around the killer whale detections for the later years. So where we did not see them in 2012, 2013, we are seeing them in the later years. And this is a trend that happens all throughout this area. This is just an exemplary graphic. But we see that the killer whales are coming in more consistently in the later years. And then kind of also of note is this incredibly far north mooring of ours. It's our most northern mooring. And we really did not expect to see any killer whales at all up here. But then sure enough, in 2019, we were able to see some killer whales, as well as a teeny tiny blip in 2018, where killer whales were coming in where we absolutely did not expect them this far north. Also, kind of note, so this is now comparing, it's the same graphic as before, but now we are looking at bowhead whales, a potential prey source for killer whales, as well as the killer whale presence. And bowhead whales can be hunted by killer whales, and they actually have a behavior where they will flee into the ice to avoid killer whales. And so as a subsistence harvested species, they're a species that we really want to pay attention to. And we see that as there's more killer whale presence in the Arctic, in these areas where the bowhead whales are, there's increased overlap between bowhead whale populations and killer whale populations. So these killer whales are very efficient predators. It's definitely something we want to keep an eye on if they would have an impact on this bowhead whale species. So just to kind of go into what we were thinking about for these killer whales, we think that these are likely, well, we are pretty sure at this point that these are transient killer whales. You can identify them based off of their calls. Brynn Madrigal did some good work on that for this population. So transient killer whales, as opposed to resident and offshore killer whales, are the marine mammal eaters. So they'll eat gray whales, bowhead whales, beluga whales, fur seals, bearded seals, and essentially whatever they can get their hands on. Well, fins. So these are all potential species that could be impacted by an increased killer whale presence. As I said, killer whales are very good at their job of being predators. Normally, killer whales exhibit ice avoidant behavior because it's very difficult for them to break through the ice due to their dorsal fin, whereas Arctic resident species like bowhead whales can break through it quite easily. So they will normally avoid ice to avoid entrapment and suffocating. But with less ice, of course, there's less of a risk of this to them, so they're able to venture further into the Arctic. As I mentioned before, prey species often have specific predator avoidant behavior. So one thing to consider with killer whale presence is not just their direct predation pressure on these animals, but also the impact of stress and potential food avoiding or loss of food opportunities that their prey species could have if killer whales are more of a presence in the Arctic. So with that, I will take any questions. Thanks.
Killer whales are obviously
and pretty much all animals that we're looking at, food is definitely a big motivation that we look into. So when there's new opportunities, you know, one of the reasons why they have all these different potential strategies for going after different prey is just that they will experiment, they will look for different prey. So we definitely think that looking for new prey opportunities is a big motivation for why these killer whales will go into these new areas, especially if they can get kind of an advantage on the prey that they might not normally have.
One of the questions we have from the webcast, what does this mean for other predators in the area? I'm thinking particularly of polar bears in this case.
Right.
When you now have a new predator in that area competing, I guess, against the killer whales.
Right. There is some overlap between what polar bears will eat and what killer whales will eat. We're not 1,000% sure what the killer whales are going for in this area, although we have some ideas that it could be bowhead and other mysticetes. But they also will go for beluga whales and seals, both of which polar bears have been recorded to eat, primarily, of course, pinnipeds. So there could be some overlap between these two predators kind of vying for prey.
A question from Rick Lovett on our webcast. Killer whales appear to be benefiting from climate change. Are there other mobile animals that are also winners in this?
I think it's definitely something to kind of think about. You know, as this ice is going away, of course, that's really bad news for the ice-dependent species like your bowhead whales, your polar bears. But for other species, if there's if the Arctic is so rich in nutrients that there's actually potentially more opportunities for the kind of migratory species that will come in, your humpback whales, your killer whales, that might have new kind of unexploited by them at least niches to go into.
Question from the webcast. With this new behavior of killer whales, can this be used to inform conservation for the whales or for other Arctic animals?
Yeah, I think that particularly, so these populations of transient killer whales are not of concern as far as endangered species go, but they do affect other animals that are of concern. I mentioned the bowhead whales. Some populations of bowhead whales are down to only a few hundred, and of course they're quite vital for subsistence hunters. So as far as conserving these killer whales, of course, if they ever did become a sort of endangered species, if they were ever threatened in any way, it would be good to have this information of where they have gone. So if something goes south for them, so to speak, and they have more of an endangered risk, it's good to keep track of what the population has been doing, of course. But I think primarily our concern for this is other potentially endangered species.
Okay. It's just a cascading effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
We lose ice, and it affects so many different things that we don't even think about. But this is very interesting research into an apex predator for sure.
Yeah, definitely. They're good at their job. They get the name for a reason.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brynn.
Thank you.